In 30 seconds, you will be witness to one of the greatest online events in the history of, well, online events. Descript proudly brings to you a topic that you deeply care about and whose name is the title of this online event. I'm Don. I am not your host. I am an overdub stock voice included for free with Descript. So, now, let's meet someone who actually works here.
Hello, everybody. I am that person that actually works here. My name is Jay LaBeouf, and I am the head of business development here at Descript. If you're new to Descript, Descript is an app that allows you to edit audio and video as simply as editing text. You drag in your audio and video assets, we convert them to text, and then you just select the cruft you don't need. You just edit, right? Editing, that's all it is. So what we're going to cover today, we're joined by Ellen Horne, who's going to tell us a little bit about what an editor actually does. And our hope is to go inside the mind of an editor on a top podcast. Let me bring in some of my guests on the screen to join me. I'm joined by Ellen Horne and Harmony Drudek. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning.
So in
afternoon
today's
where I am.
Afternoon, good evening, we have people joining from all over the place. To kick us off, let me just explain what we're going to cover in the next 45 minutes or so. First, we're going to cover what on earth is an editor and what is their practical role. We're going to talk about identifying and confronting some narrative issues that many of you will experience in creating your content. We're going to talk a little bit about how you keep pushing and when you keep pushing to get more tape and more source material, and when you should actually abandon ship. And we're going to do that all through the story of a real case study. We're going to talk a little bit about the Lies We Tell podcast that Ellen worked on. So as we get set up a little bit, we want to make this as interactive as possible. So everybody, I want you to join us in the comments section of this YouTube stream. The question we have for you: what podcast are you currently listening to that you think more people should listen to? And this can be in the past tense if you binged something recently that you think we need to hear about. Let's drop that in the comments. We're going to not only share that with our community, we'll bring it up whenever Ellen wants to see them. But first, let me introduce our guest. Ellen is a former Radiolab executive producer. You might also know her if you were a student at Columbia University or New York University in audio journalism. You might also know her if you've listened to some original content on Audible or listened to many, many episodes of Radiolab. Ellen's currently editorial director of Story Mechanics. Ellen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Jay, my pleasure. I am to be here. Descript has a tough tool for me, and it's been great to see it develop over the past few years. It's become so much more essential to my workflow. It took me a while to figure out how to work it into my workflow, and so I'm nervous a little bit of that as I talk about these issues and editorial issues today.
Awesome. Well, I promised everybody we're going to talk about the Lies We Tell podcast. Why don't I play a little clip from that? I'm going to play the trailer from season 1. Let's bring that up.
From Luminary Media and Jigsaw Productions.
How can I believe you? You lie for a living,
I'm Ellen Horne.
I'm Alex Gibney.
And we're the hosts of the new narrative podcast series, Lies We Tell, where we investigate lies and what drives us to tell them.
This really was and is more about the manipulation than it is about the money.
I don't know. Orgasmic then? Who knows?
Honestly, that sort of feels like there must be some kind of like getting off on this that he
Has to be.
Yeah.
Has to be.
Like, how many people have to get hurt before people start looking at the evidence? I'd like to know the answer to that.
Surprising, character-driven stories.
In my mind was racing. I was going over and over all of the conversations that I had with this character.
Oh, yeah, I got you.
We're gonna make a killing.
Do you still carry a gun with you wherever you go?
Absolutely. Everywhere I go. I'm sitting here looking at an Uzi now.
Did you catch that? From Academy Award winner Alex Gibney and Jigsaw Productions.
only from Luminary.
It's powerful stuff. Ellen, the opening line of our abstract is great editors craft well-told stories. The story is yours. Where do you want to start this?
All right, let's get into it. So let's see if I advance this. Will it go? Okay. So I was at Radiolab for 12 years, and now I run my own company, and I teach, and I have been thinking a lot about the issue of when to double down and get more tape, and when to just walk away. And I should say that I this is paraphrasing the great editor Walter Murch. I should say I am not an editor by nature. I am much more of a producer. I'm creative and resourceful and tenacious. The great editor Walter Murch says that editing is the art of just editing out the bad stuff. So cool, except it's a really profound question. What is the bad stuff? And what is the good stuff? So as someone who is a tenacious producer, this talk is going to be a little bit about the problem with tenacity. And when you're working on something, you'll get a lot of feedback. You'll get as you share what you're working on with your editor and with other producers, and you should have an attitude of trying to embrace that feedback and solve those problems. And so the question is, when does that reporting trouble kill a story? And when does it inspire you to transform your work and your thinking and get more creative and do more? From my background, at Radiolab, it was no problem if the story wasn't working. You just put it on the back burner, maybe do 10 or 20 more interviews, read some more things. It could take years for something to evolve. But now that I run my own company, this is really expensive. It can be really expensive to do that. And for my students, it's totally impossible. If you want to finish your class in 14 weeks and get your project done, you can't just take limitless amounts of time. So I've been really thinking a lot about this question of how to get something good enough and better faster. And editors are the people who ask questions that help you get something from from an idea that you like and you want to talk about, to an idea that's something important to talk about, something that is good enough. The editors are the people who help you get the idea clearer and better. And so it's important, I think, just as a baseline, to understand that what I'm talking about is narrative audio, where you're using, it's not just a conversation that's being edited, but that we're using a series of conversations, mixed media, gathering interviews and gathering movie clips and other audio, and then editing it together with narration to tell a story. So the producer's job is to find that story, to research it, to find the right perspective, to find the right voices to tell the story, to validate that information, to refine the story so that it's the most valuable version of this story for the audience, to respect the audience's time and their intelligence, and then to publish the story. So this Jay played the intro of Lies We Tell. This is a series that I worked on with Alex Gibney, and I'm going to talk about 2 stories that we considered for the series. One where we got an interview with the person who had been revealed to be a liar, and one where we didn't get the interview. One story makes it into production and the other doesn't. And I guess I want to make some disclaimers right here at the top. I want to say that this talk is not just an object lesson here. It's more of a public self-interrogation, and it is definitely not safe for work. We have some things in here that I'm going to talk about, which are a little bit
Spicy.
We're not going to go into spicy. That's a good way of saying it. Spicy.
For the first time, this is the first probably not safe for work Descript live stream. For those of you with young children around, we normally encourage you to join our live streams and bring them to them. You might ask them to go into a different room or pause and come back at another time to figure out what is so spicy. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you, Jay. I'm just realizing I need to switch my Descript drive to play a little piece of tape here. So hold on just a second.
And actually, while you're doing that, Harmony wanted to bring up a few of the podcasts, by the way.
Please.
We can see what else our listeners are listening to. What are people listening to and recommending for us? How Sound. The Rabbit Hole. How to Save a Planet. ESPN Daily. Masters of Scale. Suave. I don't know why I'm reading. You can all read them.
All right. So,
fantastic.
So if Jay, if I just play out of Descript, everyone will hear it?
Through the magic of the internet.
That's amazing. All right. So, so when Alex Gibney called me up to do this series on lies, he's somebody who is obsessed with lying, and he had heard an episode that I did on Radiolab really like 18 years ago. I started recording interviews for this episode. He called me up and he started telling me about this guy.
What's the first clause in the first sentence of the most famous speech in American history? 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation. No, they didn't. That is a lie.
This is Joe Ellis, a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian. He's a leading scholar on the American Revolution.
Okay, so that's from Lies We Tell. Obviously, we do end up telling this story. Joseph Alex Gibney told me, was somebody who lied about going to Vietnam. And Alex was just fascinated with it. He thought that it was really intriguing. And he thought it was intriguing because the idea of a historian who lied about his own personal history was a mystery that he wanted to solve. And so I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. Okay. And I reached out to some of Joseph Ellis's former students, started making calls, talked to maybe 8 of them. Felt like I had enough to reach out to Ellis. Reached out to Ellis and got a no. He didn't want to talk. And we kept trying to reach out to Joseph Ellis, went a number of different ways to try and get to him, but didn't get the interview. So So here's the question. Is that an editorial obstacle that is insurmountable? Do you drop it then? How much insight can you get into the reasons that someone does something if you can't speak directly to them? I thought, well, that's it. Let's walk away, right? Like, what's the point? And so Alex and I talked about it, and Alex didn't feel that way. He felt like, this is really interesting. Let's talk about it. I felt like, well, geez, we can't get that close to his reasons. What's the point of talking about this story? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. We were right at the beginning of our journey in the series, and so we were looking at all kinds of different stories. And I think the thing about doing a show about lies is that once you focus on that frame, you just start noticing that, like, oh my God, they're everywhere. You could be talking about fraud and adultery and all sorts of malfeasance. We did stories about people who were con men and undercover cops and all kinds of things. And let me move off Joe Ellis here for a second. And so one of my producers, I worked on this series with some amazing producers, and my editor, I should point out, was Brenna Farrell, amazing, talented Brenna Farrell, who I worked with at Radiolab, and I was really lucky to work with her on this, and I'm continuing to work with her on story mechanics projects. And she was intrigued by Joseph Ellis, I should say. Dana Bialik, a producer at Story Mechanics, found through Google, just looking for stories, another story that we started doing some research into. This now is where we get our second character for today's talk, a sexpert. And this is also where we get into the not safe for work part. So buckle up, everybody. Butt fisting. I mean, I was super excited to talk about butt fisting. I felt like all the other, as we were getting into doing this series, all the other story ideas were so dark. They were like, people who were lying about running marathons and then committing suicide, and really dark stories. They were really like the dark side of human nature. And so it felt to me like, oh, wow, here is something that is at least potentially some fun, interesting, surprising tape about a fake doctor. What's up with that? And we started looking into it. And let's hear some more. Harmony, can you give us some more of people's favorite things to listen to while I bring up some more tape? I gotta switch again.
Awesome. Oh, we've got plenty of paprika coming into your mornings. Thank you all for that. And thank you, everybody, joining from the Middle East. It's great to see a good turnout.
All right. So this story about Damien Sandler. We were not the only people to be paying attention to Damien Sandler. One of the things that was interesting to us was that one of my early favorite podcasts, the Savage Lovecast, had featured him. Now, this is not, you will not be able to find this. This is exclusive audio that has been taken down from the internet, but the kind producers of that podcast shared it with me because they booked Damien Sandler to be on the Savage Lovecast.
Joining us for What You Got, Damien Jacob Sandler is a clinician, sexologist, scholar of forensic and legal medicine, and scientist trained in digital epidemiology. He is chief of sexology and clinical research programs at Felnet Health Research Foundation for North America, and the director for the program in the study of sexual minorities and health policy at Felnet Health Europe. Hey, Damien, how are you?
Hi, Dan. I'm good. I'm happy to be here.
So let me just say, wow, like that sounds so official, right? Like so experty. So what is he there to talk about?
essentially, we looked at a study that examined bondage couples, both heterosexual and homosexual couples, where one partner wanted to be choked during sex to achieve orgasm. And in particular, we are trying to assess what legally happens to people that accidentally kill their partner while performing choking.
Okay, so it's not long after he goes on Savage Lovecast that this guy, there's a he publishes this is a different study. He publishes this in the Journal of Forensics and Legal Medicine, the butt fisting study. And it comes up on the I Fucking Love Science list. And this journalist, Jennings Brown, picks it up. And I mean, as one would, he sees butt fisting in the title and is sort of like, whoa, what's that? Don't expect to see that in your news feed every morning. And something kind of surprises him, jumps out at him.
I mean, he seemed to be in his mid to late 20s, and yet he was claiming to have a PhD and an MD from Harvard Medical School. He claimed that he had all these awards. It was a little vague. He was very clever in his wording, but it was things like studied toward PhD. Like in some places it was very direct. Like when articles were written about him from people that don't seem to exist. So there was a lot of fact checking involved with this, and like the whole process was kind of mind numbing to a certain point, because when he would answer something, I would then have to like fact check that, and it was just this weird noodly salad of constant fact checking.
So, this Jennings Brown goes at this point to Sendler's website and interviews Sendler. He some of the funny details here are that Damien Sendler is passing himself off as a doctor, and he's like in a lab coat at Harvard. Like there's a photo of it. So he's not actually explicitly saying that he got his doctorate from Harvard, but there's like a picture of him next to a sign that says Harvard. I mean, there were things like that where just pinning him down on what exactly was he claiming. He clearly was misrepresenting himself. But Jennings Brown publishes, he goes on a Savage Lovecast, and Dan Savage is, aghast at this. We think, well, this is kind of interesting. And I think one of the things we thought was interesting was that his research hadn't been retracted. There were people distancing themselves from him. The studies were all these kind of meta studies of things that were online, but it wasn't clear that he actually had any interaction with patients directly. And so Dana called up, or Dana Bialik, amazing producer and reporter that I work with, called Sendler up and got him into the studio. And that's when things got really weird, because he sort of casually shows up in happy to talk. And here, are we showing my Descript project here? Let's go ahead and share from Descript. Let's see.
Awesome. So
Yeah, let me go and share from Descript here.
Awesome. Hey, Kendra. Thanks. We're glad you're excited too. Diane, thanks for joining us.
Let's see.
There we
Actually,
go.
I got Ann Coulter to talk about me. I was like, why the liberals are not attacking?
Here, let's see. I'm going to show you guys. This is actually, so this is the session that we were putting together as we were trying to make sense of this story. So like this is organized, surface a little bit of our workflow. This is Dan Savage when we got the tape. We organized it here when the Jennings Brown interview is here. Damian Sendler, you know, she called him. He's really affable on the phone. Can you come in? She says, how would you like to go by? I love this part.
Do you go by Damien or Dr. Sendler? Oh, you can call me Damien.
Okay. So then he comes into the studio, and I don't know if this is going to be real obvious here, but you know, you book an interview with somebody for an hour. Here we are talking an hour and 8 minutes. We got kicked out of the first room that we booked, I think after 2 hours, and moved to a second room. And so then now let's see, let me go back to my this. Yeah. So then one of the tools that I think is really helpful is to put together a timeline and to start gathering some details for like fact checking. Like, okay, what do we know to be true about this guy? What is he claiming? What is he saying? And from that 3-hour conversation, I mean, it was like the volume of details was really impressive, and yet it was slippery what exactly he was telling us. Fascinating. Personally, I thought really fascinating because he was claiming that a lot of the source of the problem was that he's Polish. My dad is Polish, and so I thought it was kind of interesting to me that the cultural difference was what he was claiming was the problem. And we got a translator to come to the interview with him, and we were hoping to sort of go deep in research in Poland. We had connections there and thought, oh great, this is like we have some opportunities and connections that we can exploit here to try and come at it that way. But pretty soon we were finding ourselves asking these questions like, okay, are we just giving attention to somebody that we really shouldn't be giving attention to? Like, why are we telling this story? And that's where I think, you know, the editor asking you, what is this story about? Why are you telling this story? What is it for? What does it mean? It's a really important question. Sendler had said this in our conversation.
Actually, I got Ann Coulter to talk about me. I was like, why the liberals are not attacking this guy? You know, why?
Talking about you like at Fox News, or was that like on
I saw it. I know she talked about this on Twitter.
So he seemed to be really interested in getting attention, and we didn't want to just fall into his hands, right? So we brought in a friend to help make sense of it, a producer or a writer and science journalist, Dan Engber, who is incredibly helpful at sorting through these issues. And Dana sat down with him in the studio. And another technique that we used a lot at Radiolab, and you hear a lot on podcasts, is this kind of brain dump conversation, the making sense of it conversation. And I think that one of the things that's great about Descript as a tool is that it really allows you, as you can see in my session here, I don't know if you guys are still looking at it.
Can you reshare?
Yeah, let me reshare it. It just really allows you to throw your tape together and start working in your tape really quickly and start hearing it out loud, right? So we got Dan into the studio with Dana to really talk it through. And
like part of my just confusion and bewilderment. So when I went in to talk to Sendler, it was just a week ago now, I kind of didn't know I didn't really know what to expect. And then immediately what struck me is how available he was, right? That shouldn't have been surprising, but the detail, like say, it was Monday afternoon. He was on his way to a cocktail party. He never asked how long the interview was going to be.
Afternoon cocktail party?
Yeah, uptown somewhere. And yeah, what a life. And I wondered, is someone who writes about all of this stuff or researches all this stuff, is he going to make me feel uncomfortable? Is he going to be creepy? And I didn't get that at all. The ickiest feeling for me was that I was giving him any attention and any stage. And I don't really know what to do with that feeling, because I do think it's interesting to look at this. You know, yeah. Is there I guess, is that harmful to give him a stage?
I would say yes. Okay, first of all, I'm a Sendler Monday afternoon cocktail party truther. I do not believe that he was going to a cocktail party on the Upper West Side on Monday afternoon. That is just not credible at all. But but I bring that up because, like, why do you think that anything that do you have any reason to think that anything he told you is true at all from like what I'm doing an hour from now to goodbye?
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
So that raises another issue, and one that that I find with students especially, is just something we have to remember, that information has to be verified, and that you have to remember that frequently when people agree to talk to you and talk to the media, especially if you have a platform and an audience, you have to question their motives and wonder what their agenda is. And that fact checking is important. And I raise this here in this forum, especially because one of the things that I was struck by as we were, we launched Lies We Tell like at the beginning of the pandemic, and we were talking to people about the show, and I had this conversation with somebody who's actually a great journalist and had come into journalism as a fact checker, but was someone who had started to do podcasting in a, we record a conversation, I record interviews with people and then edit it lightly and it goes out into the world. And she said that I should probably wish I could go back in time, and this is live. They said that there was no possibility of fact checking in that sort of thing. You have a conversation, you can't verify whether anything is true. It just is what it is. And I thought, that's crazy. Your responsibility as a journalist is to verify if things are true, actually. It doesn't absolve you of that, or at least contextualize it. Like, you're not, maybe right now we are live streaming into the world and we can't control that, but most of the time you are editing something before you are hitting publish, and you can do at least a minimum amount of making sure that things are credibly true, plausible, have some verification attached to them somehow. So I just think you should, make sure that you are able to verify and source what you're putting out into the world. Otherwise, you kind of have to start wondering, wait, what is it that we're doing here? Why are we doing this? And I think that's another thing that I just want to encourage everybody to ask the question of, like, wait, why are we doing? Because it's super fun to talk about butt fisting. I mean, I'm here talking about butt fisting. I think it's great. not I'm not getting into the details, but like love to get the attention to talk about that. And I also think that there are lots of things which are big and attention grabby that can take up lots of room, but that maybe we should think about whether there are more serious things we should think about and talk about and are important to talk about, and that the context is important. So over the course of looking at the Sendler story, I found myself coming around to Alex's point of view on the Joseph Ellis story. And it was not just that, it was all the other stories that we were doing. But the the bigger thing that was happening was over and over again, I was having this this dilemma of like, when is it a lie that is important enough to talk about? Why do we talk about it? What can we learn from it? What's interesting about it? And in the case of, let's see, oops, gotta switch drives again. And in the case of the story of Joseph Ellis, a man who had lied about his Vietnam service, one of the things that was interesting about him was that we, while we couldn't talk to him directly, we talked to the reporter who had broken the story. And that guy was pretty amazing and had a lot to teach. So the person who we spoke to, have you guys seen the movie Spotlight? Do you know about the Boston Globe's investigative reporting team? Yeah. So this is Walter Robinson, and he was played by Michael Keaton in the movie. And he talks about the decision to break the story about Joseph Ellis. It wasn't an easy decision.
Professor Ellis had an extraordinary career and is a revered American historian. No one has questioned the integrity of his scholarship.
Other historians have scrutinized Ellis's work. No one has ever suggested that he is wrong on the details, wrong on the meaning, in his interpretation of history. Robbie had a dilemma, but
finally, after going through all of the catalogs at Mount Holyoke,
Robbie made another discovery.
That he taught a course in Vietnam and American culture. And when I saw that, I wondered immediately whether he ever raised this fictionalized Vietnam service of his in class. And I began to contact students who took this course both at Mount Holyoke College and at Amherst College, and interviewed them about this course and what he said. And everyone I interviewed who'd taken this course remembered him recalling different instances of his service in Vietnam.
I remember him saying something about, like, you know, how all the Vietnam movies portray explosions and drama and kind of, you know, this traumatic aspect. I
spoke with one student from Joseph Ellis's class at Amherst, Eric Carey.
With just like a few words, he said, "I never saw any of that," which I guess ironically was literally true.
Eric had taken one of Ellis's stories to heart before learning it was untrue. It had made a big impression on him.
And he kind of related this story of like a kind of big, burly jock having a moment of sentiment and kind of walking out in the field, you know, with, of all things, an Emily Dickinson, a book of poetry, and then just sitting down underneath a tree and being moved to tears. It seemed so real, like, you know, it seemed very relatable.
Another student told the Globe she was dumbstruck when she learned Ellis had been lying about his role in Vietnam. She vividly remembered him talking about being at My Lai, shortly before American soldiers brutally killed almost 500 civilians there.
Okay, so, you know, the thing that we came around to was that this was a story where the insight about lying was that it was an act of imagination, and that while we couldn't get close enough to Ellis to understand his what the drivers were and his personal reasons, it did give us an opportunity to talk about the role of journalism and fact checking, and to introduce me and Alex. And it also gave us an opportunity to kind of reflect on the self awareness of the person you're interviewing. Because another thing came up with Sendler for us was that we didn't know the extent to which he understood what he was doing. In all of our conversations with him, in his, phone calls and the 3-hour interview, since he didn't admit that he was lying, it wasn't clear what he understood. This is another excerpt from this is sort of another tool that we have, this making sense of it conversation that Alex and I did. So Alex and I talked about it and talked about the process of interviewing.
As people invested in telling,
And this is from the final series. This is sort of how I set it up in with some narration here, and so this is just an excerpt from the final introductory episode of Lies We Tell.
as people invested in telling true stories for a long time, Alex and I both wrestle with the strangeness of interviewing people. So last week, we're sitting in your office, and you said, this whole series on lying is making me think, what the f am I doing with my career?
Right.
Our understanding of this strange work of ours has evolved over the years.
I just taken for granted that people, what people were telling me was the truth.
Yeah.
Or that they were, by and large, telling me something that really happened, when I had to suddenly realize, oh my God, actually, these are just constructs, and they may bear some relationship to what happened, but in a funny way that after a brief period of total panic, it allowed me to come out the other side and think, well, yeah, that's the way the world is. That's why we tell stories.
So I think the key question that your editor is asking you is, why are you telling a story? That's sort of the question you have to ask yourself. So with that, I would love to know if you guys have questions for me.
All right, Ellen, we got a question from Jasmine.
Awesome, Jasmine. Let me let's see. Let me show let me show something that I have that I can share. Hold on just a second. Am I sharing my Descript screen right now?
You are not yet, but you
good.
will in
Okay.
a second.
Let's see. Let me show. This is going to take me a second to download, but
totally worth it.
Okay. Yeah, totally worth it. So I produce with WBEZ and the University of Chicago an econ series, which we did an episode on oh yeah, here we go. On working from home. So let's see. Let me share this and I'll kind of walk you through workflow a little bit. This is just impromptu, so not prepare this for okay. So typically we do an interview. This is like the the raw interview, and then you'll see highlights, a script. We go to the published version here that you can share, so that you can see, here's this, the draft of the episode, so that people can engage it. This one, unfortunately, the one I picked doesn't have any comments, but you can publish it to Descript. We could write the script. We've at this show in particular is a show where we do everything in Descript. We write the script in Descript. We do everything right up till we fly out to the final mix. But really, the whole thing we make in Descript. So,
Ellen, would you mind walking
I'm
through
sorry,
those?
I don't
those
have. Yeah.
No, walking through maybe
let me find a better episode, because there's one that's like a little bit more organized. Unfortunately, that one's like not a great episode. Or something. Hold on just a second.
No problem. For those of you looking at the app for the first time, Ellen's looking at the project browser. So you can see not only the drive that Ellen is part of, but also all the other drives that she might collaborate with.
Yeah, let me take maybe this episode. Let's see.
And Ellen, when you're doing your recordings, are you recording direct into Descript or onto a field recorder? Where do you do that?
Yeah, so these recordings are not directly into Descript. They're into Field Recorder. They're synced. Sometimes they're synced in Pro Tools and then brought into Descript. Sometimes they're synced directly in Descript. Does this have much collaboration in this one either? Very sorry. Well, actually, that one's not that bad. Okay, so this has some collaboration in it, but you'll see that this is one where, like, here are some notes from the hosts, right? Where we put some scripting in here, and then you can see the hosts have come in and said, actually, could we do this instead? Let me play this. It's downloading the files still, so it'll take just a minute, but that is one way where you can set a session and share the link to the session, and then everybody can get in and listen to it. One of our hosts in this series is a New York Times reporter, and he had not worked in audio before he started working on this podcast, and so he doesn't know audio editing, but working in Descript was very easy for him to learn how to engage the audio and listen to it right away. Working just from transcripts, sometimes some of us have had the experience of the frustrating experience of working with a host who wants to see something from a transcript when the audio, in fact, does not support that. And I think one of the joys for me of working with Descript is that it prevents, the long back and forth where, like, well, that sounds different in audio than it does on paper. Like, you have to just listen to it. It is so much faster to just read. It always takes more time to listen to the audio, but when you have the audio and transcript together, it's just so much easier to get right into the audio, and it avoids so much trouble. Yeah, unfortunately, this is a session where um, I sometimes am going back and forth. So, like I said, I have had some difficulty figuring out how to work in Descript from the jump, and because I spent so long working in Pro Tools, I really am comfortable working in Pro Tools. So I had brought like my whole thing into Pro Tools, done many versions in Pro Tools, and then we wanted to bring it back into Descript to make some revisions. So basically, we brought it in through stems. We put out our stems. We linked them up. So if you go to the media library, you can see that we did a 5-stem version where we just put those into Descript and brought it back in that way. And I found that that's actually a really easy way to go back and forth. If you want to get back into Descript to make some, major changes, move some big chunks around, and you can do that pretty easily, especially if you're collaborating with somebody who can't work in Pro Tools for some reason, once you've made the jump into where you're mixing or something like that.
Absolutely.
Do you have any more other questions?
Yeah, actually. So you've talked about writing your script both in Descript, but then going on and recording it. So you don't have to screen share, but you want to talk through your flow of as you're assembling an episode. Maybe you have some tape, you want to write some narration around it to kind of fill in the gaps. Where do you do that, and when do you actually commit it to a recording?
Yeah, so I use the feature of here. Let me see if I can share. Move back over here to this webinar. I use this feature called Overdub. Overdub is one of those where you have you can name the voice here. So I'm going to say this is Ellen speaking. And then I write my script here. Hello. I need to intro this tape. So sometimes you can also do in parentheses, write this part later. One of the things I'll tell students is that it's really helpful to lay out your tape first, to just try and go fast through the beats of the story and not get bogged down in wordsmithing, right? Like sometimes you'll spend a lot of time crafting moments, but then the entire structure will move on you and you'll be like, oh my God, I wasted hours on this thing that doesn't even exist anymore. So it's really helpful if you can just think of it as like make big moves. And so you can find the parts that you know are going to stay and then work into the fine tuning later.
Speaking of fine tuning,
and so
Pro Tools is, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, so then in terms of recording that, you can record directly into Descript. I don't do that. I record, in my studio, I record right into Pro Tools. Typically, it depends if I'm recording with somebody in a recording studio. Sometimes they'll record into and then send the files to me, but it's easy just to import into Descript.
Awesome. So Ellen, we've had two questions kind of on that theme. One is basically like your workflow. I'll summarize this of when do you work in Descript? When do you sound design in Pro Tools? And do you ever bring it back into Descript after going to Pro Tools? And the second one was a little bit more about like, hey, you're using Descript now. Well,
yeah.
When you were on the Radiolab team, Descript didn't exist. So can you talk about like how your workflow has evolved and if you still use Pro Tools?
Yeah. Yeah, oh my gosh, yes. So yes to both, although I'll say I use Pro Tools less and less as I use Descript more. And basically, so when I first started at Radiolab, one of the things, we spent a lot of time in Pro Tools logging tape. It was always a desire for me to have verbatim transcript in the regions of Pro Tools so that I could search for the tape that I wanted to use, and we would try to kind of script while we were working with the audio. So there's actually, what? Let me see. There's a Transom post around logging that's about where I shared some Ponzi Supernova logs that Kelly Prime made. Kelly Prime is now, she's an editor, but she was an intern at Radiolab that I then hired to work with me when I first went to Audible. And what I found when I went to Audible was like, oh, all of a sudden I didn't have access to like the endless stream of interns that we'd had when I worked in public radio. Because of course you at a commercial company like Audible/Amazon, we would need to pay the people to work, and that in fact the idea of paying people for tape or for doing things like that where you weren't quite sure if you're using the tape, it just didn't quite make sense. So some of those things that had been so routine for me at Radiolab, I didn't have access to anymore, and I couldn't just be like exploratory about what was transcribed and logged. When Descript came along, I found that it was much easier for me to go back to the idea of like do a lot of interviews, gather a lot of tape. Tape is cheap. And that I wouldn't be afraid that I wouldn't know what's in the tape, because suddenly the transcription being so immediate and attached to the tape, for me, great that then I can export from Descript directly into Pro Tools. But for me, the big game changer came when I started assembling my rough cuts in Descript and actually working in Descript to bring together different kinds of tape. So, multiple interviews and brain dumps and media. That's really when things started to click for me, and it became this totally essential tool. I'll say, like last summer, I gave Jad a tour of Descript, and I think the Radiolab team is using Descript a little bit now. He was like, mind blown. It is really incredibly useful.
Awesome, Ellen. And as we near the end of our time together, as people are getting started, we have just looking at the comments, we have a great mix of people that are just getting started assembling their first things to some seasoned professionals working on their podcast. What key tips should people hold in mind as they're sitting down to edit hours and hours of content?
Marianne McCune gave a great talk at Third Coast where she talks about coming back from a reporting trip and just thinking of the couple of key moments, rather than meticulously logging all of her tape. And I think that there is, if you're editing towards a highly edited narrative project in the end, just thinking about 2 or 3 takeaways from the tape that you've gathered, highlighting those things, really useful. Leaving notes for yourself in there can be really useful. If you're trying to condense a large conversation into a short takeaway, or to, get something into a smaller piece, then you often have to think of things structurally. Use markers in Descript to help make sections so that you can sort of leave behind your structural thinking about, okay, this is the part of the interview where we talked about this. This is the part of the interview where we talked about that. Those notes to yourself are really helpful, especially when you come back to it, 3 weeks later and you don't quite remember what this interview is about.
Fantastic. We really appreciate this, Ellen. We've heard some topics that I didn't think we'd ever cover on the webinar. We covered a ton of material in a very short time. This is over 14 weeks normally for one of your students. I do hope you'll join us again next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody,
thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you all for showing up. We hope you enjoyed the ride. Some other things we can help with. If you do want to keep the conversation going, please do follow us on our Discord channel, discord.descript.com. This is for users to talk with each other and the Descript team. If you have anything you need help with, we saw a bunch of questions today. We're sorry we couldn't answer all of the technical ones. The good news, go to help.descript.com. There's a little chat bubble now on the bottom right. Click on that, live chat, ask somebody on our support team or submit a request. We'll get back to you within a couple of hours, almost always. Thank you all for joining us. And again, thank you so much, Ellen,
Thanks, Jay. Thanks for
our
having
guest
me.
today.
Please.
Our guest today, Ellen Horne. Make sure to follow Ellen at Story Mechanics.
Thanks.
Bye, all.